"Mom, we just jotted down exactly how much cash you're going to give us for Christmas," my son said, handing me a list. I took the piece of paper. I looked at the numbers. Written there, for him, was $30,000. For my daughter-in-law, $8,000. For the grandkids, $200. It totaled almost $40,000. I agreed with a smile and promised a special surprise. That was my response. Simple, calm. No screaming, no tears, no questions. Just a smile and a promise. Jason seemed relieved. Ashley, my daughter-in-law, smirked with satisfaction. They had come expecting resistance, perhaps, or maybe they just expected me to do what I had always done. Say yes, accept, appease, give everything they asked for regardless of the cost to me. "Perfect, Mom," Jason said, kissing my forehead quickly. "I knew we could count on you." Ashley nodded beside him, already mentally calculating what she would spend those $8,000 on. I saw her glance at her phone, probably checking online stores, planning shopping sprees. The kids were in the backyard playing, clueless about what had just happened in my living room. Unaware that their parents had just put a price tag on my love. They left shortly after. I remained alone in my house, with that list still in my hands. I stared at it for a long time. $40,000. An amount that represented more than what I earned in an entire year with my modest Social Security check. An amount they had decided I should give them, not because they needed it to survive, but because they wanted to maintain a lifestyle they considered they deserved. I folded the paper carefully and put it in the drawer of my side table. Then I sat in my armchair, the one I had bought 15 years ago, and that still worked perfectly, even though the upholstery was worn. I looked around my house. It wasn't big. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. I had paid for it with years of work, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, cleaning office buildings so that Jason could have an education, an opportunity, a future better than mine. And now that better future included coming to demand money from me with a list. But I had smiled. I had promised a special surprise, and I meant it. Because when I handed over the envelopes at Christmas dinner, the whole family would be paralyzed with fear. Not the fear that comes from violence or yelling. The fear that comes when someone you took for granted finally shows you who they really are when they stand on their dignity. Christmas was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks in which Jason and Ashley would call me occasionally, ask how I was, feign interest. 6 weeks in which I would carefully prepare what would be inside those envelopes. It wouldn't be money. It would be something much more valuable. It would be the truth. I got up from the armchair and walked to the kitchen. I brewed some coffee, that ritual that had calmed me since I was young. While the water boiled, I thought about my husband, Bob. He had died 28 years ago of a massive heart attack. He was barely 37 years old. Jason was 7. Overnight, I became a widow, a single mother, the only one responsible for keeping a wobbling household afloat. Bob had been a good man, hardworking, affectionate, present. If he were alive, what would he say about this? What would he say seeing his son, whom he loved so much, treating his mother like an income source? It hurt to think that Bob wasn't here to see what Jason had become. Or maybe it was a blessing. Maybe it was better that he didn't have to witness this transformation. I drank my coffee slowly, savoring the heat, the bitterness. I thought about the years that followed Bob's death. Hard years, full of fear and uncertainty. I had gotten work cleaning houses during the day and corporate offices at night. I slept 4 or 5 hours. The rest of the time I worked or took care of Jason. I made his meals, helped him with homework, took him to school, made sure he had everything he needed. He never lacked anything. Maybe we didn't have luxuries, but he had love. He had food. He had clean clothes. He had a mother who would have given her life for him without thinking twice. And I did. I gave my life for him. I gave my youth, my health, my dreams. I put it all in a basket and handed it to him, hoping that when he grew up, when he became a man, he would understand the weight of that sacrifice. But he didn't understand, or maybe he did understand, and simply didn't care. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Barb, my neighbor and best friend for more than 20 years. Barbara Miller, a 58-year-old woman who had gone through similar situations with her own kids. She understood. She knew. "Linda, how are you?" I saw Jason leave a while ago. Is everything okay? Her voice was warm, concerned. Barb always noticed when something was wrong. She had that intuition developed by women who have lived too much, who have seen too much. Yes, Barb, everything is fine, I lied. Just a quick visit. There was a pause. She knew I was lying. Come on over, she said finally. I have fresh banana bread, and I need company. I couldn't say no to her. Barb was one of the few people in my life who gave to me without expecting anything in return, who really listened to me, who saw me as Linda, not as mom, not as grandma, not as a resource, but as a woman with her own needs, her own pains, her own story. I'll be there in 10 minutes, I told her. When I arrived at her house, Barb welcomed me with a long hug. She didn't ask anything immediately. She just made me sit down, served me coffee and a slice of bread with butter, and waited. She waited for me to be ready to speak. And I spoke. I told her everything. The list, the numbers, the demand disguised as a Christmas request. I told her how I had smiled, how I had promised a surprise. I told her about the fear I had briefly seen in Jason's eyes when I accepted so easily, as if a part of him knew something wasn't right but preferred to ignore it. Barb listened to me in silence. When I finished, she sighed deeply. $40,000, she repeated. Linda, they know how much you make. They know that amount is impossible for you. And yet they asked you for it. That isn't a lack of consideration. That is deliberate cruelty. Her words hit me. Deliberate cruelty. It sounded so harsh, so definitive. But it was true. Because asking for something reasonable is one thing, but asking for something impossible, something you know is going to cause stress and anguish, that is something completely different. What are you going to do? I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, I replied. Not what they asked for, what they deserve. Barb smiled. It was a sad smile, but also a proud one. Finally, she said. Finally, you are going to put yourself first. She was right. For 60 years I had put others first. My husband, my son, my extended family, my employers, everyone except myself. I had lived believing that was the right thing. That was what good women did. Sacrifice, give, appease, never complain, never demand, never set boundaries. But boundaries aren't cruelty. Boundaries are self-respect, and self-respect isn't selfishness. It's survival. Days passed after that visit from Jason, and the routine continued as always. I got up at 6 a.m, made my coffee, took my blood pressure medication, ate toast with a little jam for breakfast. I looked out the window toward the quiet street where I had lived for the last 30 years. This house had seen so many things. It had seen Jason grow up, become a teenager, a young man, a man. It had seen my tears when the bills didn't add up. It had seen my small victories when I managed to save something or when I got a better-paying cleaning gig. My Social Security check was $1,200 a month. Of those, $500 went to rent, $100 on utilities, $150 on medications, because diabetes and high blood pressure weren't optional. Another $150 on food, buying the basics, the necessary, no luxuries. The rest was divided between transportation, emergencies, and some occasional small treat. There wasn't much left over. There was never much left over. But I had learned to live with that. I had learned that happiness wasn't in having a lot, but in needing little. I had learned to find pleasure in simple things. A cup of coffee in the morning, a conversation with Barb, an afternoon of sun in my small backyard where I grew some basil and cilantro plants. I didn't need more, or at least that's what I had convinced myself of for years. Jason called 2 days after bringing the list. His voice sounded cheerful, relaxed. Mom, how are you? Just calling to hear from you. Lie. He was calling to ensure I hadn't changed my mind, to keep the pressure on subtly. He had learned that from Ashley. She was a master in the art of manipulation disguised as concern. I'm fine, son, I replied with a neutral voice. I'm glad, Mom. Hey, Ashley and I were thinking that maybe we could go to dinner with you next week. It's been a while since we spent time together. More lies. They didn't want to spend time with me. They wanted to make sure the money was guaranteed. They wanted to keep cultivating the illusion that we were a close and loving family, so that when Christmas came, I couldn't deny them anything. "Sure, whenever you want," I said. "Perfect. I'll let you know what day works for us." What day works for them? He didn't ask what day worked for me. He assumed I had nothing important to do, that my calendar was empty waiting for them to decide to fill a space with their presence. And the worst part was that he was right. My calendar was empty. But that didn't mean my time didn't have value. We hung up, and I stayed staring at the phone. I thought about all the times Jason had called in the last few years. There was always a motive. He always needed something. Money for a car down payment. Money for an anniversary gift for Ashley. Money for the kids' private school tuition. Money to fix something in his house. Money, money, money. But he never called just to ask how I was. He never called to tell me about his day or to listen about mine. He never asked if I felt lonely, if I needed help with anything, if my health was okay. Those questions didn't exist in his vocabulary when it came to me. I went to visit Barb that afternoon. She was in her yard, watering her plants, something she did religiously every day. Barb had been widowed 10 years ago and had raised 3 children alone. 2 of them lived in other states and barely called her. The third lived nearby, but only appeared when he needed money or for her to watch his kids. It was a familiar story, sadly common among women of our generation. "I brought you coffee," I said, showing her the thermos I had brought. "Always so considerate," she said, smiling. But there was sadness in that smile. There always was. We sat in her plastic chairs under the shade of an avocado tree she had planted years ago. The tree gave abundant fruit, but Barb often gave them away to the neighbors because she couldn't eat them all alone. Her children never came to pick them up. "Jason called," I told her. "Of course he called," said Barb with irony. "He has to keep his mom happy until Christmas arrives and he can cash his check." Her words were harsh but true, and they hurt precisely because they were true. "You know what the worst part is, Barb?" I said, feeling something break in my voice. "The worst isn't that he asks me for money. The worst is that he doesn't even fake it well anymore. He doesn't even make an effort to make me believe I matter beyond what I can give him." Barb put her hand over mine. It was a wrinkled hand, spotted by the sun and the years, but warm and firm. "I know, honey, I know. I went through the same thing with my kids, and I'm going to tell you something that took me years to understand. Our children aren't bad people. They are people who learned they could take us for granted and never face consequences. We taught them that our love was unconditional, and they interpreted that as our love being an inexhaustible resource, no matter how they treated us." Her words shook me. Because she was right. I had taught Jason that no matter what he did, no matter how he treated me, I would always be there. I would always forgive. I would always give. I would always put his needs before mine. I had taught him that I had no boundaries, and now I was surprised that he crossed them constantly. "But no more," I said quietly. "No more," repeated Barb. "And when you give them those envelopes at Christmas, when they see what's inside, they are going to understand that things changed. That you changed." I spent that night awake, thinking about what exactly I would put in those envelopes. It had to be something that impacted them, that made them reflect, that showed them the weight of their actions. It couldn't be just a letter saying I was disappointed. That would be easy to ignore, to justify, to forget. It had to be something more. Something that made it clear that this time was different, that I was different. I got up and went to my small desk in the corner of my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept important documents. There was my will, made 5 years ago when I turned 55. In that will, everything I had I left to Jason. The house, the few savings, everything. Because he was my only son, and I assumed he would love me enough to value that legacy. But now I wondered if that will had to change. If someone who treated me like a bank deserved to inherit what had cost me so much to build. If someone who demanded $40,000 from me, without any consideration, deserved to receive everything when I was no longer here. I took the will and put it away again. That wasn't a decision to make in the middle of the night with emotions running high. But it was something I would definitely have to consider. The following week, Jason and Ashley came to dinner, as they had said. They arrived with the kids, Liam, who was 8, and Chloe, 6. The kids hugged me upon entering, but it was a distracted hug. They were already looking around, seeing if I had bought anything new, if there was any toy or candy for them. "Hi, Grandma," said Liam. "Did you bring something for us?" "Not this time, honey," I replied, "but I have cookies I made this morning." "Oh, just cookies," he said with disinterest. Ashley heard him, but didn't correct him. She didn't tell him to be grateful or that homemade cookies were a gift made with love. She just smiled as if her son's comment were perfectly acceptable. The dinner was tense, although they didn't seem to notice. They talked about their plans, their purchases, their lives. Ashley mentioned they had seen a bigger house in a better neighborhood and were thinking of moving. "Of course, with the Christmas money we could put down a decent down payment," she said, looking directly at me. "Ah, yes," I replied non-committally. Jason talked about a business he wanted to invest in, something about importing electronics. It sounded risky, but he was convinced it would be profitable. "With the 30,000 you're going to give us, I could start strong. It's a huge opportunity, Mom. You're going to be proud when you see everything I'm going to achieve." Proud. He wanted me to be proud that he used my imaginary money for an uncertain business. Not proud of being his mother. Not proud of having raised him. Just proud of financing his dreams while mine withered in silence. "I'm sure it will be interesting to see what happens," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. After dinner they left quickly. They had to get the kids to bed, they said. They didn't even help me clear the table. Ashley stayed seated, checking her phone while Jason said a hurried goodbye at the door. When they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the mess of the dinner. The dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen, breadcrumbs scattered on the table, glasses with juice residue left unrinsed. Jason and Ashley had left, leaving everything like that, as if it were natural for me to clean up after them. As if at 60 years old, my only function was to serve them and then erase any trace of their presence. I began to clean up slowly. Every plate I washed weighed more than normal, not due to physical weight but due to the weight of what it represented. Years of doing this. Years of cleaning up after them. Years of accepting that my time didn't have the same value as theirs. The hot water ran over my hands while I scrubbed the plates. My hands. I looked at them really for the first time in a long while. They were wrinkled, spotted, with marked veins. Hands that had worked a whole lifetime. Hands that had carried Jason when he was a baby. Hands that had scrubbed other people's floors so he could have new shoes for school. Hands that had cooked thousands of meals, washed thousands of dishes, folded thousands of articles of clothing. Hands that had never received a massage, a gift of expensive lotion, a moment of deserved rest. I finished cleaning past midnight. The house fell silent. That silence I knew so well, the silence of living alone. But that night the silence felt different. It didn't feel like loneliness, it felt like anticipated peace. Like the moment right before something important changes forever. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window. Outside, the street was empty. The streetlights illuminated the cracked pavement. This neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was safe. It was home. And I had paid for it with my own effort. I thought about Bob, about how he would have handled this situation. Bob was firm, but fair. He didn't tolerate disrespect, but he wasn't cruel either. He always said that raising a child was teaching them to be a good person, not just to be successful. That values mattered more than money, that dignity was not negotiable. What I would have given to have him by my side at that moment. To be able to rest my head on his shoulder and hear his voice telling me everything would be okay. But Bob had been 6 feet under for 28 years, and I had learned to be my own shoulder to lean on. When Jason was 7 and his father died, I remember he asked me if we would be poor now. It was an innocent question from a scared child who had just lost his dad and saw his mom crying every night. I told him no, that we would never be poor because we had love and we had each other. That as long as we had each other, everything would be okay. I believed my own words for years. I worked double shifts, believing that every sacrifice would be worth it because we were together. That when Jason grew up, he would understand what I had done for him. That understanding would turn into gratitude, and that gratitude into reciprocal love. But it never happened. Jason grew up and went to college. I took out a Parent Plus loan to pay for his degree in business administration. It was a huge financial burden. For 5 years I lived on the minimum to be able to make the monthly payments. But it made me happy because I saw my son progressing, studying, building his future. He graduated with honors. I went to his ceremony wearing the same dress I had worn to my brother's wedding years prior because I didn't have money to buy a new one. I saw other moms with their elegant suits, their jewelry, their expensive handbags. I carried a purse I had bought at a thrift store. But I didn't care because my son was graduating, and that was the only thing that mattered. Jason hugged me that day. He said, "Thanks, Mom." He told me all my effort had been worth it. I cried with happiness, believing that we had finally reached the finish line, that the hard years were over, that now he would work, I could rest a little, and we would build an adult relationship based on mutual respect. How naive I was. 2 years later, Jason met Ashley. She worked at the same company as him. She came from a family with money, used to certain comforts. From the beginning, I saw that she looked at my house with disdain. I noticed how she wrinkled her nose when she visited my neighborhood, how she commented on how small my living room was or how old my refrigerator was. But Jason was in love, and I wanted him to be happy, so I silenced my worries. I smiled when he introduced Ashley as his girlfriend. I was kind when she barely spoke to me. I organized a small engagement dinner at my house, although Ashley had made it clear she would have preferred a fancy restaurant. The wedding was another matter. Ashley wanted a big wedding at an exclusive country club. Ashley's father offered to pay the majority, but they expected me to contribute too. They asked me for $5,000. I didn't have $5,000. I didn't even have $1,000 saved. But Jason looked at me with those eyes I had known since he was a child. Those eyes that said, "Please, Mom, I need this." And I couldn't tell him no. I asked the bank for a personal loan. I went into debt for 2 years to give him those $5,000 that vanished in a 6-hour party that I didn't even enjoy because I spent it worried about how I would pay the monthly installments. Ashley didn't even thank me. She said something about it being the minimum a mother should do for her son on his special day, and Jason didn't correct her. He just nodded as if she were completely right. That was the beginning. From there, the requests for money became constant. For the down payment on their condo, for new furniture, for a better car, for Liam's baby shower, for the cribs and baby clothes, for the baptism, for the first birthday. Every important event in their lives came accompanied by a bill that somehow I had to pay. And I paid. I always paid. Because he was my son, and because I had learned that a mother's love meant giving without expecting anything in return. But no one had told me that giving without limits taught receiving without gratitude. Ashley was molding Jason slowly. At first, he still called me often. He still asked how I was. He still showed some genuine concern. But over the years, that changed. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter, the conversations more superficial. When the grandkids were born, I thought things would improve. That being a grandmother would give me a new role in the family. That Jason would want me to spend time with Liam and Chloe. That he would need me to watch them while he and Ashley worked. I offered to do it. I told them I would gladly take care of the kids during the day. Ashley looked at me as if I had offered something offensive. "No thanks, Linda," she said, using my first name instead of calling me Mom like other daughters-in-law do. "We prefer a professional daycare. The children need to be in an appropriate educational environment." Appropriate educational environment. As if my house were inappropriate. As if I hadn't successfully raised a son who now had a university degree and a good job. But I didn't say anything that time either. I just nodded and smiled and said, of course, whatever was best for the children. The kids grew up seeing little of me, a couple of times a month if that. And when they saw me, Ashley had already planted in them the idea that grandma was someone you got gifts from, not someone from whom you received love or wisdom or stories. Just gifts. Liam once asked me why my house was so old. He was barely 5 years old, but he had already learned to judge. I explained to him that it was a house with history, that his dad had lived there when he was a boy, that every corner had beautiful memories. But it doesn't have a big screen or video games like our house, he said, and he was right. My house didn't have those things, because I lived on $1,200 a month and couldn't afford luxuries. But I couldn't explain that to a 5-year-old who lived in a house with 2 new cars in the driveway and annual vacations to the beach. Years passed. I got old. 60 years arrived faster than I expected. My body began to ache in places I didn't know before. Diabetes arrived at 55. High blood pressure shortly after. My knees started to complain when I climbed stairs. My eyesight weakened, although I didn't need permanent glasses yet. My life became smaller, quieter, less demanding because I no longer had the energy I used to. But the strange thing was that while my life became smaller, Jason and Ashley's expectations of me became bigger. They expected more money, more gifts, more availability, as if the fact that I had fewer obligations meant I should dedicate all my time and resources to them. They never asked if my medications were expensive. They never asked if my Social Security was enough. They never asked if I needed help with something in the house that was falling apart. They only asked when I could give them what they needed. The morning after that awkward dinner, I woke up early as always. The sun was just beginning to rise. I made my coffee and took my pills. 2 for blood pressure, 1 for diabetes, another for cholesterol. My morning routine included a small parade of medications that reminded me I was no longer young, that my body needed help to function correctly. I looked at the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. There were 5 weeks left until Christmas. 5 weeks to decide exactly what I would put in those envelopes. 5 weeks to mentally prepare myself for what would come after. Because I knew there would be consequences. I knew that when Jason and Ashley opened those envelopes and discovered there was no money, there would be a reaction. Probably yelling, accusations, maybe even cutting ties with me completely. And I had to be prepared for that. I had to be prepared for the possibility of losing my son. Although in reality, I had already lost him years ago. Only now I was going to make it official. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mrs. Miller. It was a young, professional female voice. This is Dr. Mendez's office. We're just calling to remind you of your follow-up appointment next week. Yes, thank you. I'll be there, I replied. Perfect. And ma'am, do you have the outstanding balance from your last visit? It's $120. $120. Another unexpected expense. Or maybe not so unexpected. There were always medical expenses that Medicare didn't cover completely. Labs, co-pays, minor procedures. They kept piling up. Yes, I know. Can I pay $50 now and the rest next month? I asked. There was a pause. Let me verify with billing and I'll confirm. I hung up feeling tired. $120 I hadn't budgeted for. $50 that I would have to take out of my emergency fund, which was increasingly less of a fund and more a couple of bills hidden in an envelope. And meanwhile, my son expected me to give him $30,000. The irony was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I decided to walk to the grocery store that morning. I needed vegetables and some basics. The store was 6 blocks from my house. Before, I walked that distance without problems. Now my knees protested halfway there, and I had to stop to rest on a bench. A lady older than me sat next to me. She must have been at least 75. She was carrying 2 heavy grocery bags. Good morning. She greeted me with a toothless but genuine smile. Good morning, ma'am, I replied. Resting the knees too? She asked with complicity. Me too, I confirmed, smiling. We stayed in silence a moment. 2 old women resting on a bench, carrying bags that weighed more than our bodies wanted to admit. Do you have family to help you? She asked suddenly. I have a son, I said. And you? 3 sons, 2 daughters, 8 grandkids. And none live less than 2 hours from here. Her voice held no bitterness. She was just stating a fact, a reality shared by millions of older women, children who leave, who build their lives far away, who have their own families, their own problems, their own busy lives. I understand, I said simply. She nodded. We are the forgotten ones, she said. But we aren't dead yet either. We're still good for something more than giving money at Christmas. I froze. It was as if she had read my mind, as if she knew exactly what was happening in my life. She looked me straight in the eye. Whatever you are thinking of doing, do it. At our age, there is no time for regrets, only for decisions and consequences. And the consequences of doing nothing are worse than those of doing something. She got up with effort, took her bags, and walked away slowly. She didn't turn back, didn't say goodbye, just left her words floating in the air like an unexpected gift of wisdom. I arrived at the store feeling lighter despite my knees. I bought what was necessary: tomatoes, onions, peppers, beans, rice, tortillas, a little chicken, the basics. Nothing special. I spent $32. I mentally calculated that I had $218 left for the rest of the month after paying rent and utilities. $218 for food, medicine, transportation, emergencies, and somehow I was supposed to come up with $40,000 for Christmas. On the way back, I ran into Cecilia, a neighbor from the building next door. Cecilia was 62 and still worked as a seamstress from home. Her fingers were deformed by arthritis, but she kept sewing because her check wasn't enough. "Linda, so good to see you," she greeted me. "How have you been?" "Good, Cecilia. And you?" "Here, surviving. I have a big order of dresses for a Sweet 16 party. It's going to take me 2 weeks, but it's well worth it. It's $400. $400 for 2 weeks of intense work that would probably worsen her arthritis. But she did it because she needed it. Because at 62, she didn't have the luxury of retiring completely. Because life didn't stop just because the body started to fail. "Hey, Linda," she said, lowering her voice. "I heard your son the other day when he came over. Sorry, but the walls are thin. I heard something about money for Christmas." I felt myself blushing. "Yes, it was something like that." Cecilia shook her head. "My daughter, too. Last year she asked me to lend her $2,000 for a vacation. $2,000 I didn't have. I told her no, and she didn't speak to me for 3 months. 3 months punishing me with her silence because I couldn't give her money to go on vacation while I ate beans and toast to save on food." "What did you do?" I asked. "Nothing. I waited." And eventually, she spoke to me again because she needed me to watch the kids. They always come back when they need something. But, Linda, I'm going to tell you something. After those 3 months of silence, something changed in me. I realized that her love was conditional, and if her love was conditional, then mine could be too. Her words stayed with me. Conditional love. It was exactly what Jason gave me. "I love you, Mom. As long as you give me what I want. I respect you, Mom. As long as you don't set boundaries. I need you, Mom. As long as you are useful for my plans." I arrived home exhausted, not so much from the walk but from the emotional weight of it all. I put away the groceries. I made myself tea. I sat in my worn armchair and closed my eyes. I thought about all the women I had known throughout my life. Strong women who had raised children alone. Women who had worked until their bodies gave out. Women who had given everything and received little in return. Women who aged in silence, invisible to their own families. Barb was right. Cecilia was right. The lady on the bench was right. There was no longer time for regrets, only for decisions. That night I took out an old notebook I kept in my nightstand. It was a notebook where I used to write shopping lists and reminders. I opened it to a blank page and began to write. First, I made a list of everything I had given Jason over the years. Not to charge him for it, but to have clarity. To see in concrete numbers the magnitude of my generosity and his ingratitude. College tuition, $25,000 in Parent Plus loans that I paid off over 5 years. Contribution for the wedding, $5,000. Down payment on the condo, $3,000. Various furniture, $1,500. Liam's baby shower, $800. Cribs and baby clothes, $600. Liam's baptism, $400. Liam's first birthday, $300. Chloe's baby shower, $700. Chloe's baptism, $400. Chloe's first birthday, $300. And so I continued. Christmas gifts, birthday gifts, borrowed money that was never returned, emergency expenses that turned out not to be emergencies. The list grew until it filled 2 full pages. At the end, I added it all up, $42,300, more than $40,000 I had given in the last 10 years. $42,300. I stared at that figure for a long time. It was more than I earned in 3 full years on Social Security. It was more than my house was worth. It was more than I had saved in my entire life. and I had given it all to Jason, believing I was investing in my son, in his happiness, in our bond. But what had I received in return? Sporadic calls, rushed visits, demands disguised as requests. And now a list asking for almost the same amount I had already given, as if the previous 42,000 had never existed, as if my bank account were infinite, as if my capacity to give had no bottom. I closed the notebook and put it away. Those numbers weren't to show Jason. I wasn't keeping a tally to bill him. I was keeping a tally for myself. To understand the magnitude of what had happened. To see clearly how I had reached this point. The following days passed slowly. Jason didn't call. Ashley neither. It was as if after handing over their list and receiving my acceptance, they no longer needed to maintain contact until the moment came to collect their payment. I was a post-dated check. There was no reason to verify until the cash-out date. Barb came to visit me on a Thursday afternoon. She brought sweet bread she had bought at the bakery a couple of blocks away. We sat in my small kitchen with coffee and bread, as we had done hundreds of times over the years. "Have you decided what you're going to put in the envelopes?" she asked directly. Barb never beat around the bush. "Not exactly yet, but I know it won't be money." "Good, because giving them money now would be teaching them that they can treat you like this and still get what they want." "I know. But, Barb, I'm scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing him. He's my only son. If I do this, if I tell him no in this direct way, maybe he won't speak to me again. Maybe I'll lose my grandkids too." Barb took my hand across the table. "Linda, look at me. You already lost your son. The boy you raised, the one who played in this kitchen, the one who hugged you when he was scared, that boy doesn't exist anymore. The man who handed you that list isn't your son. He is a stranger who shares your last name." Her words hurt, but they were true. The Jason I remembered had disappeared years ago. Maybe somewhere deep down he still existed, but he was buried under layers of ambition, materialism, and Ashley's influence. "And the grandkids?" I continued. "Liam and Chloe barely know me. If Jason decides to keep them away from me, I will lose them completely." Barb sighed. "That is what they want you to think, that you need them more than they need you, that you must do anything to keep them close. But, Linda, what kind of closeness is that? One where you are only present when you give money. That isn't family. That is emotional extortion." I took a sip of coffee. It was lukewarm already, but I didn't care. "So, what should I put in the envelopes?" "The truth. Put the truth in those envelopes. A letter explaining how you feel. Documents showing your real financial situation. Maybe copies of medical bills so they see you aren't rich. Maybe a copy of that list you made with everything you've given them. Make them see reality, but that won't change them," I said. "It will only make them angry. Maybe. Or maybe it will make them reflect. You won't know until you try. But what I do know is that if you give them the money, or if you pretend you're going to give it and then make excuses, nothing will change. They will continue viewing your love as something they can exploit indefinitely." That night I began to write the letter. It wasn't easy. I started and deleted. Started again. The words didn't come out like I wanted. They sounded too harsh or too weak, too accusatory or too condescending. I wanted to find the exact tone. Firm but loving. Clear but not cruel. After 4 attempts, I finally wrote something I felt satisfied with. "Dear Jason, when you handed me that list a few weeks ago, I smiled and promised a surprise. And here is your surprise. It isn't money. It is something more valuable. It is the truth. The truth is that I don't have $40,000. I don't even have $10,000. I barely have enough to live month to month on my Social Security check of $1,200. Half goes to rent. The rest to food, medications, and basic utilities. I live on just enough. I have no luxuries. I have no significant savings. I don't have a secret fund from which I can withdraw those amounts you asked for. But even if I had that money, I wouldn't give it to you. Not because I don't love you, but precisely because I love you. Because giving you that money would be teaching you that it is okay to treat me like a bank. That it is okay to come to my house with demands. That it is okay to measure my worth as a mother by the number of dollars I can hand over. I have spent 60 years of my life putting others first. First your father, then you. Always sacrificing my needs for yours. And I don't regret that. That is a mother's love. But there is a difference between sacrifice and abuse. There is a line between giving generously and being exploited. That line was crossed when you handed me that list. I am not writing this to make you feel bad. I am writing it because I need you to understand something fundamental. I am your mother, yes, but I am also a person with limitations, with needs, with dignity. I am not an infinite source of resources. I am a 60-year-old woman who worked her whole life, who was widowed young, who raised you alone with all the love she had. And I deserve respect, not because I am perfect, but because I am your mother, and that should mean something more than a signature on a check. The letter continued for 2 more pages. It spoke of specific memories, of concrete sacrifices I had made, of moments when Jason had chosen Ashley's words over mine, of how I felt invisible in my own family, of how the grandkids saw me as a provider of gifts instead of a grandma with stories and love to offer. It ended with this: I am not closing the door, but I am setting boundaries. If you want to have a relationship with me, it has to be a real relationship, based on genuine affection, not on financial transactions, based on mutual respect, not on unilateral expectations. I am here. I will always be here, but on my own terms, with my dignity intact. I love you, son, but I also love myself, and it is time for both things to coexist. Your mother, Linda. I read the full letter 3 times. I cried during every reading, but I didn't change anything. It was exactly what I needed to say. I printed 3 copies, one for Jason's envelope. I would keep another for myself, and the third I would give to Barb to keep, in case I doubted later and wanted to remember why I had made this decision. The next step was deciding what else I would put in each envelope. For Jason, besides the letter, I would include a copy of my bank statement showing my real balance, $422. Also a copy of my pharmacy receipts from the last month, $193 just in medicines, and a copy of my rent receipt, $500 a month for a modest house in a modest neighborhood. For Ashley, her envelope would contain a different letter, shorter, more direct. Ashley, I don't really know you, and you don't know me, but I want you to know something. I am not your enemy. I never have been. Since you entered this family, I have treated you with respect. I have bitten my tongue when you have made comments about my house, my clothes, my way of life. I have smiled when you have compared your mother to mine, suggesting she is superior because she has more money. I accepted all that because I thought that with time you would learn to value me. But I was wrong. You don't want to value me. You want to use me, and you taught my son to do the same. This ends today. Not because I am vindictive, but because I finally understood that I cannot buy your respect with money. And I am not going to keep trying. For the kids, their envelopes would contain something different. Not a letter because they were too small to understand. Instead, I had bought a book for each of them. Classic storybooks and fables that my mother had read to me when I was a girl. On the first page of each book, I would write a message. For Liam, Grandma loves you more than money can buy. These stories are my real gift to you. Stories that come from our family. Stories about respect, family, and true love. I hope that someday, when you are older, you will read them and understand. For Chloe, a similar message adapted to her age. 3 weeks remained until Christmas. 3 weeks in which Jason would probably call to confirm that the money would be ready. 3 weeks to strengthen my resolve, to mentally prepare for what was coming. Barb helped me put each thing in its corresponding envelope. We did it at her house because I didn't want to have the envelopes in mine where I might doubt or change my mind in a moment of weakness. The envelopes remained stored in Barb's closet, in an old shoebox where she kept important documents. Each envelope had a name written in my shaky handwriting. Jason, Ashley, Liam, Chloe. 4 envelopes that would change everything. 4 envelopes that contained truth instead of money, dignity instead of submission. Barb brewed more coffee while I looked at the closed box. "Do you feel okay with this?" she asked. "No, I feel terrified. But I also feel lighter than I have in years. It's strange. It's as if I had been carrying a huge stone, and finally I am letting it go. That stone is the guilt that doesn't belong to you. The guilt of not being enough, of not giving enough, of not sacrificing enough. But, Linda, you already gave enough. More than enough. Now it's your turn to receive at least a little peace. I returned to my house that night feeling a strange mix of terror and liberation. I knew that what I had done had no turning back. Once Jason opened that envelope at Christmas dinner, everything would change. For better or for worse, but it would change. 2 days later, Jason called. "Mom, just wanted to confirm that everything is in order for Christmas. You know, what we talked about." His voice was casual, as if he were confirming a reservation at a restaurant and not the delivery of $40,000 that I didn't have. "Everything is ready, Jason. You all will have your surprise just as I promised." "Perfect, Mom. You're the best. Hey, we're going to do dinner at our house this year. Ashley already invited her parents too. It's going to be incredible. Come over around 7. He hung up without waiting for my response. Without asking me if I was okay with doing dinner at his house. Without asking me if I had a way to get there. Without asking me anything. Just informing me of decisions already made. So the dinner would be at his house, in front of Ashley's parents. That made everything more complicated and more humiliating. They would open the envelopes in front of witnesses, in front of her family who had always looked at me with condescension because I came from less than them. But maybe that was better. Maybe they needed witnesses. Maybe they needed someone else to see what they were doing, what they had done. The days dragged on. Every morning I woke up and for a moment forgot what was coming. Then I remembered perfectly and felt a weight in my stomach. But it wasn't the weight of doubt, it was the weight of anticipation, of knowing that something big was approaching and not being able to stop it or accelerate its arrival. 1 week before Christmas, while doing my shopping at the small market on the corner, I ran into Tanya, an old acquaintance from work years ago. Tanya had been a supervisor in one of the offices I cleaned. She had always been kind to me, unlike others who treated me like I was invisible. "Linda, how long has it been? How have you been?" "Good, Tanya. And you? Did you retire already?" 2 years ago. "And it's been hard. I'm not going to lie. The pension isn't enough. My kids help me a little, but they all have their own families, their own expenses." "Your kids help you," I repeated. "That is good." "Yes, well, they help when they can. It isn't much, but it's something. They give me about $100 a month between the 3 of them. It's not enough for luxuries, but at least I can buy my meds. $100 a month between 3 kids." And she said it with gratitude, with genuine appreciation, because at least her kids thought of her. At least they gave her something without her having to ask or demand it. I didn't even have that. I had a son who asked me for $30,000 in one fell swoop. We chatted a little more before saying goodbye. While walking back home, I thought about the different realities we older women lived. Some had children who helped even if it was a little. Others had children who didn't help but didn't demand either. And some, like me, had children who not only didn't help but also expected us to continue being their source of income. I arrived home and found an envelope under my door. It was from the building management. I opened it with trembling hands because envelopes from management never brought good news. It was a notice of rent increase. Starting in January, my rent would go up from $500 to $600 a month, $100 more a month, $1,200 more a year. I sat on the sofa with the notice in my hands. $100 more. Where was I going to get $100 more every month? I would have to cut back even more on my food, or maybe skip some medications, or not turn on the heat as much in winter, even if the cold hurt my joints. $100 more a month, while my son expected me to give him $30,000 in one lump sum. The irony was so cruel, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I called Barb. I told her about the rent increase. She listened in silence. "Linda, you have to talk to Jason about this. Before Christmas. Tell him your rent is going up. Tell him you need help. Give him a chance to be a son before it's too late." "No, Barb. If I tell him now, he's going to think it's a manipulation to not give him the money. Or worse, he's going to offer to give me something small in exchange for me giving him the big amount. No, the die is cast. The dinner will be what it will be." That night I didn't sleep well. I dreamed of Bob. In the dream we were young again, sitting at the table of our first house, the one we had to leave when he died because I couldn't pay the mortgage alone. Bob looked at me with those eyes that had always made me feel safe. "You did good," he told me in the dream. You raised our son with love. If he chose not to value it, that is his decision, not your failure. I woke up with tears on my cheeks. I didn't know if the dream was my subconscious giving me permission or just my desperate mind looking for comfort in memories of someone who was no longer there. 5 days before Christmas, Ashley called. It was weird. She never called me directly. It was always through Jason. Linda, this is Ashley. Just wanted to coordinate some details for the dinner. Tell me, Ashley. We're going to be about 15 people. My parents, my brothers, their families, and you guys, of course. It's going to be something big, elegant. I'm hiring a catering service. I don't want you to worry about bringing anything. Don't worry about bringing anything. As if I had offered to bring something. As if I had the resources to contribute to a dinner for 15 people. That's fine, Ashley. I'll be there. Perfect. Oh, and Linda, Jason told me about your generous Christmas gift. It's very sweet of you. My parents are going to be impressed. They always thought that you were, well, you know, of limited means. It will be good to show them that you can also be generous. Of limited means. That was the polite way of saying poor. And show them that you can also be generous. As if my value as a person depended on how much money I could give away. As if 50 years of hard work didn't count because I hadn't accumulated wealth. See you at dinner, Ashley, I said, and hung up before she could keep talking. My hands were shaking. I felt rage, a cold and clear rage that I hadn't felt in a long time. Ashley wanted to use me to impress her parents. She wanted to exhibit me as the generous mother-in-law who finally measured up to her wealthy family. But what she was going to exhibit was something completely different. The last days before Christmas passed in a kind of fog. I followed my normal routine. I ate little because nerves had taken away my appetite. I slept poorly because nightmares mixed with anticipation. Barb came every day to verify that I was okay, that I hadn't changed my mind, that I hadn't chickened out. I assured her no, that the envelopes would be delivered just as they were. The night of the 23rd, I called Cecilia, my seamstress neighbor. I asked her if she had something elegant she could lend me for the dinner. I didn't have appropriate clothes for an elegant gathering. My clothes were simple, old, functional. Cecilia lent me a burgundy dress she had made for a client who never picked it up. It was a little big on me, but with a belt it looked decent. She also lent me a knitted shawl she had made herself. You look beautiful, Linda, she said when I tried it on. You are going to walk into that house with your head held high. Because no matter how much money they have, you have something money doesn't buy. Dignity. The morning of December 24th dawned cold and gray. I woke up early, even though I had slept barely 3 hours. Nerves had kept me awake most of the night, mentally rehearsing what would happen that evening. How would Jason react? What would Ashley say? How would I feel when it all exploded? I made my coffee as always, took my meds, sat by the window watching the street wake up slowly. Some houses already had Christmas lights on, families preparing to celebrate, families that perhaps also had their problems, their secrets, their resentments hidden under forced smiles and wrapped gifts. Barb arrived at 10 in the morning with the envelopes. She had kept them all this time so I wouldn't waver at the last moment. It's today, she said, putting them on my table. You are ready. I don't know, Barb. Part of me wants to run away. Pretend I'm sick. Not go to that dinner. But you aren't going to do that. Because this isn't just for you. It's for all of us. For all the mothers who have been squeezed to the last drop by ungrateful children. For all the grandmothers who are valued only for their wallet. You are going to go. And you are going to do this. And you are going to change something important. She was right. This was bigger than me. It was a pattern that repeated in thousands of families. Mothers giving until they were empty. Children taking without thanking. A vicious cycle that only broke when someone had the courage to say, enough. I got ready slowly. I showered, put on the borrowed dress, did my hair carefully. I put on a little makeup, something I rarely did. I wanted to look dignified, presentable, not like a victim, but like a woman who knew her worth. Barb helped me with the shawl. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, the only large mirror I had in the house. I didn't recognize myself for a moment. That woman in the mirror looked strong, determined, as if in the last few weeks she had found something she had lost years ago. She accompanied me to the bus stop. I put the 4 envelopes in my old purse. They weighed almost nothing physically, but they felt like stones. "Call me when it's over," Barb said, hugging me tight. "No matter the time, I'll be awake waiting." The bus ride took 40 minutes. Jason lived in a much better neighborhood than mine. Big houses with manicured lawns, new cars parked in the driveways. Everything clean, orderly, prosperous. The kind of place where I had cleaned houses for years, but never lived. I got off the bus 2 blocks from his house. I walked slowly, not just because my knees hurt, but because every step brought me closer to a moment from which there was no return. Jason's house was lit up with Christmas lights. Music played from inside. Through the windows I could see people moving, laughing, pouring drinks. The celebration had already begun. I rang the doorbell. Liam opened the door. "Grandma!" he shouted, but without much enthusiasm. He ran back inside without even giving me a hug. I entered. The house smelled of expensive food, wine, expensive perfumes. Everything was elegant. Modern furniture, professional decor. The Christmas tree was huge, full of ornaments that probably cost more than my rent for a month. Ashley appeared wearing a dress that surely had cost more than my entire wardrobe combined. "Linda, so good you made it. Come in, come in. Everyone is in the living room." She guided me to the living room where several people were gathered. I recognized Ashley's parents, elegant and cold as always. Her brothers with their wives, all dressed as if they were in a society magazine. "Look who's here," announced Ashley with that fake voice she used when she wanted to show off. "Jason's mom. Linda, you know everyone." I greeted them with small nods. Some responded with polite but distant smiles. Others barely looked at me. I was clearly the poor relative in this gathering of wealthy people. Jason came out of the kitchen with a glass in his hand. "Mom, good to see you. You look good. Want something to drink? Just water is fine." He brought me a glass of water and pointed me to a seat on the sofa, the least comfortable one, the one furthest from the center of conversation. I sat clutching my purse where the envelopes were. Dinner was served half an hour later. A long table decorated with white tablecloths, expensive china, crystal glasses. I ended up sitting in a corner, between Chloe, who was 6, and one of Ashley's brothers-in-law, who didn't say a word to me the entire dinner. The food was abundant. Turkey, ham, elaborate salads, French desserts. Everyone ate and talked animatedly about their successful lives, their important jobs, their upcoming vacations in Europe. I ate little, my stomach closed by nerves. Ashley stood up halfway through dinner, tapping her glass with a knife to get attention. Everyone fell silent. "Well, family, I want to make a special toast. This has been a wonderful year for us. Jason got that promotion he was hoping for. The kids are growing up beautiful and smart, and we have a lot to be thankful for. Especially family. Family that supports us. Family that is there when we need them." She looked directly at me as she said that. Several others looked at me too. I felt myself blushing. She was setting the stage. She was building the narrative of the generous mother-in-law before opening the gifts. She continued talking a few more minutes about gratitude and family and blessings. It all sounded beautiful, but empty. Pretty words without real substance. When the speech ended, Ashley's mother suggested moving to the living room to open gifts. Everyone moved with their wine glasses. The kids ran excitedly toward the tree where there was a mountain of gifts wrapped in expensive paper. Jason began handing out gifts. He called names and handed out boxes. Everyone opened their gifts with exclamations of joy. Expensive perfumes, designer clothes, electronics, everything pricey, everything unnecessary, everything designed to impress. No one had bought me anything. I didn't expect them to. But it still hurt to see everyone receiving something while I just watched from my corner. Finally, after everyone had opened their gifts, Ashley said loudly, "Well, and now for the special moment. Linda has something for us." Everyone turned to look at me. The silence became heavy, expectant. I could see the greed in Ashley's eyes, the anticipation on Jason's face, the curiosity on the faces of the others who had clearly been informed that I was going to give a significant gift. I stood up with trembling legs. I took the 4 envelopes out of my purse. I walked to the center of the room. Everyone was watching me. Yes, I brought something special for you, I said with a voice steadier than I expected. Just as I promised. I handed the first envelope to Jason, the second to Ashley. The two small ones to Liam and Chloe, although they barely understood what was happening. Jason held his envelope, looking at it with a smile. It's heavy, Mom. How much is in here? Open it and find out. Ashley was already tearing hers open without waiting. She pulled out the papers. Her face changed instantly from anticipation to confusion. What is this? Jason opened his. He pulled out the letter. He began to read. I saw how his expression went from curiosity to disbelief. His eyes moved rapidly over the words. What is this? Repeated Ashley now with a louder voice. Where is the money? There is no money, I said calmly. There is something better. There is the truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone in the room stopped moving. Glasses stayed suspended halfway to mouths. Conversations died instantly. It was as if time itself had stopped. Ashley kept looking at the papers in her hands. My bank statements. My medical bills. The letter where I explained that I wasn't her enemy, but I wouldn't be her bank either. I saw her cheeks turn red, not from shame, but from contained rage. Jason finished reading my letter. He read it completely without interrupting. When he reached the end, his hands were shaking. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Real and genuine fear. Mom, this is a joke, right? He said with a broken voice. You're playing a bad joke on me. It isn't a joke, Jason. It is exactly what it says there. I don't have $40,000. I never had it. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you after you handed me a list demanding it, as if it were your right to take it. But you promised. Ashley intervened, raising her voice. You said you would give us a special surprise. You made us believe you would give us the money. I promised you a surprise, and this is the surprise. The truth about my situation. The truth about what I feel. The truth about how you have treated me. Ashley's mother stood up. Her face showed indignation. This is an insult. Doing this here, at Christmas, in front of the whole family. What kind of woman does something like this? I turned toward her calmly. The same kind of woman who worked her whole life cleaning houses like yours to be able to give her son an education. The same kind of woman who sacrificed for decades so her son would have opportunities. The same kind of woman who finally understood that respect isn't begged for, it is demanded. You have no right, she began to say. But I interrupted her. I have every right. I am his mother, and I deserve to be treated as such. Not like an ATM. Your son handed me a list asking for almost $40,000 without even asking me if I could, without considering my situation, without showing the slightest respect. Jason stood up abruptly. Mom, this is wrong. Completely wrong. You embarrassed us in front of Ashley's whole family. You made us look like fools. I made you look like fools. Listen to your words. You aren't worried because you hurt me. You aren't worried because you treated me poorly. You are worried because you looked bad in front of others. That's what matters to you, not me, not my feelings, your image. Ashley's father spoke for the first time. Mrs. Miller, I think you should leave. This is unacceptable. You have ruined our Christmas dinner with this unnecessary drama. Unnecessary drama. I smiled without humor. You consider defending my dignity unnecessary drama. But expecting a retiree on a $1,200 pension to give you $40,000 isn't drama. That is perfectly reasonable to you all. Ashley threw the papers on the floor. I always knew you were petty. I always knew it. You acted humble, self-sacrificing, but deep down you are just a bitter woman who can't stand seeing her son happy. Her words hit me, but didn't break me. Petty. Bitter. Those were the words people used who wanted to blame others for their own failures. I am not petty, Ashley. I am realistic. And I am not bitter. I am tired. Tired of being used. Tired of being invisible, except when you need something. Tired of my value as a mother and grandmother being measured only in dollars. Jason approached me. His face showed a mix of rage and panic. You promised us, Mom. You promised, and now you leave us hanging. We have plans for that money. Commitments. What commitments, Jason? Commitments based on money that was never yours. Commitments you made assuming I would be weak enough to give in to your pressure. But I was wrong to raise a son who thinks his plans are more important than my well-being. I see. I saw it all clearly in that moment. Ashley's influence, the years of conditioning, the gradual transformation of my son into someone I didn't recognize. And I knew that my letter, my explanations, none of that would matter. At least not now. Maybe with time, maybe never. Liam began to cry. The boy didn't understand what was happening, but felt the tension, the anger, the conflict. Chloe clung to Ashley's legs, also scared. "Look what you did!" shouted Ashley, pointing at me accusingly. "You scared the kids! At Christmas! What kind of grandmother does that?" I didn't scare them. Their parents' reaction scared them. Seeing adults behaving like spoiled children who didn't get what they wanted scared them. "Get out," said Jason in a low but firm voice. "Just get out, Mom. I don't want to see you right now. I don't know if I want to see you again." His words were like a knife, straight to the heart. This was what I had feared. This was what had kept me awake for nights. The possibility of losing my son completely. But instead of begging, instead of taking it back, instead of doing what I had done my whole life, which was yielding to keep the peace, I just nodded. "That's fine, Jason. If that is your decision, I respect it. But I want you to know something. I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. But loving doesn't mean allowing myself to be disrespected. Loving doesn't mean sacrificing my dignity to feed your greed. And if you can't love me without me giving you money, then maybe it is better that we don't see each other for a while." I turned around. I took my purse. I walked toward the door with my back straight, although inside I was shattered. No one stopped me. No one said wait. No one asked me to stay. I only heard Ashley telling Jason, "Let her go. She's a crazy old woman. She'll see when she needs something from us. She's going to come crawling back asking for forgiveness." I went out into the cold night. The door closed behind me with a definitive sound. The Christmas lights kept blinking on the house. The music had started playing again inside. Life continued for them as if I had never been there. I walked to the bus stop. My legs were shaking. My heart was beating too fast. I felt like I was going to faint, but I stayed standing. I refused to collapse. I refused to give them that satisfaction. The bus took 20 minutes to arrive. I sat in the back, in the furthest corner, and there, finally alone, I allowed the tears to fall. I cried in silence while the bus advanced through streets decorated with holiday lights, families celebrating, happy people, and me, returning alone to my empty house on Christmas Eve. But amidst the tears there was also something else. Something I didn't expect to feel. A strange sense of relief, of liberation, as if a huge weight had finally been removed from my shoulders. I had spoken my truth. I had defended my dignity. And although it hurt terribly, it also felt right. I arrived in my neighborhood past 10 at night. The streets were quiet. Most families were inside celebrating. I saw a light in Barb's window. She was waiting as she had promised. I knocked on her door. She opened immediately. Her face showed concern, but not surprise. She already knew something had gone wrong by the time in my face. "Come in, honey. Come in." She hugged me in her doorway. And there, in the arms of my friend, I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I cried for the loss, for the disappointment, for the wasted years, for the son I had raised and the man he had become, for the relationship I would never have with my grandkids, for everything that could have been and wasn't. Barb didn't say anything. She just held me. She let me cry. When I could finally speak, I told her everything, every detail, every word, every look, every reaction. "You did the right thing," she said when I finished. "I know it doesn't feel like that now. I know it hurts like hell, but you did the right thing. You put yourself first. You defended your worth, and that is never wrong." "But I lost him, Barb. I lost my son." "No, honey. Your son lost himself years ago. You just stopped pretending it hadn't happened. I spent Christmas night at Barb's house. She insisted I not stay alone. She made me chamomile tea, lent me a nightgown, tucked me into her sofa as if I were a little girl needing comfort. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. I woke up on December 25th with swollen eyes and a heavy heart, but also with something I hadn't felt in a long time, clarity, absolute clarity about who I was and what I deserved. The following days were difficult. I hoped Jason would call. A part of me wished he would call to apologize, to say he had reflected, that he had understood. But the phone remained silent. There were no calls, no messages, only a void that confirmed what I already knew. To him, I had only had value while I could give him what he wanted. Cecilia came to visit me on the third day. She had heard from Barb what had happened. She hugged me for a long time without saying anything. Then she simply said, "Welcome to the club of mothers who chose their dignity." It turned out many women in the neighborhood had gone through similar situations. Daughters and sons who only appeared when they needed money. Families that treated them like obligations instead of blessings. And all had reached the same point I was at now. The point where they decided enough was enough. A week passed. Then 2. New Year's came and went without news from Jason. I began to accept that maybe this would be my life from now on. Alone but at peace. Without close family but with dignity intact. In mid-January, when I had already stopped waiting, my doorbell rang. It was mid-afternoon. I opened it without looking through the window. It was Jason. He looked terrible. Red eyes, wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, as if he hadn't slept in days. He stayed standing there without saying anything for a long moment. "Can I come in?" he asked finally with a hoarse voice. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around my house as if seeing it for the first time. He sat on the sofa where he had played as a boy, where Bob used to carry him in his arms, where we had shared thousands of moments that now seemed from another life. "Mom, He stopped, started again. "I don't know where to start." "Start where you need to start. I read your letter. I've read it like 20 times. And every time it hurts more because every time I understand better. I was an idiot, Mom. I was a terrible son. And I don't know how I became this person." His voice broke. Tears began to fall down his face. "Ashley and I are in therapy." "Well, I am in therapy. She doesn't want to go. She says we didn't do anything wrong, that you are the one who exaggerated. But, Mom, the more I talk to the therapist, the more I realize she is wrong, that I was wrong. I didn't interrupt, just listened. He made me do an exercise. He asked me to write down everything you have done for me, since I was a kid until now. And Mom, it was pages and pages. I realized how much you have given, how much you have sacrificed, and what have I given you in return? Demands, pressure, ingratitude." He wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect things to go back to how they were before, because before was wrong too. I needed you to know that I see it. I see what I did. I see who I became. And I'm trying to change. I don't know if I can. I don't know if it's too late. But I'm trying." I sat beside him. I put my hand over his. "Jason, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. But loving doesn't mean allowing myself to be hurt. Loving doesn't mean sacrificing who I am to keep the peace. And that is what I finally understood. I know, Mom. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." We talked for hours. I showed him my real bills, my Social Security, my expenses. I explained to him how my life had been the last few years. He really listened, asked questions, was horrified to realize how little I had while he assumed I was rich. When he left that afternoon, he hugged me like he hadn't since he was a boy. A long, strong, genuine hug. "I don't know if it will work," he said. "I don't know if I can fix everything I broke, but I want to try. If you let me. My door will always be open, Jason, but this time with boundaries, with respect, with dignity on both sides." He nodded. "I understand." The following weeks were of slow reconstruction. Jason began visiting me regularly, not to ask for anything, just to be there, to talk, to know me as a person and not just as the mom who solved problems. Ashley didn't change. She remained resentful. She continued believing I had been the villain. But Jason established boundaries with her too. He told her that if she couldn't respect his mother, then they would have serious problems in their marriage. The kids started coming over more often. I read them the stories I had given them at Christmas. Stories about respect, about real family, about love that isn't measured in money. Little by little they began to see me differently. not as the grandma of gifts, but as the grandma of stories. It wasn't a perfect ending. Ashley and I would never have a close relationship. Jason still had a lot of work to do on himself. I still lived with limited resources, with knee pain, with a check that barely stretched. But there was something different now. I was different. I had stood in my truth. I had defended my worth. And that had changed everything. One afternoon in February, Barb and I were sitting on her patio drinking coffee as always. She looked at me with that wise smile she had. "You know what, Linda? You did something many of us couldn't. You taught your son that mothers also have boundaries. That love isn't infinite if there isn't respect. That is a gift that will last longer than any amount of money." I looked at the clear afternoon sky. I thought about Bob, about how he would be proud that finally I put myself first. I thought about all the women who had gone through this before me, about all those who would come after. And I thought about me, about Linda Miller, 60 years old, widow, retiree, mother, grandmother, and finally, after so long, a woman who knew her own worth. I didn't have $40,000. I never would. But I had something much more valuable. I had dignity. I had peace. And I had the certainty that I had done the right thing, even though it hurt, even though it cost me, even though it had been the hardest moment of my life, because in the end, the only thing we really take from this world aren't the things we gave or the things we received. It is the way we treat ourselves. And I had finally learned to treat myself with the same love and respect I had given to others my whole life. That night, alone in my small house, with my rent that went up to $600, with my expensive medications, with my modest check, I felt richer than ever. Because finally I understood that true wealth isn't in the bank. It is in knowing that we are worth more than what we can give, that we deserve love without conditions, and that it is never, never too late to reclaim our dignity.